so that this can be remembered for posterity here. I've got everybody's attendance, at least the ones that I could catch, but I'm going to read the names of people who I did not see. I'm not going to read your name if I saw you, so don't worry about that. And let me know if you're actually here. So Yemisrach Abera. Not here. Okay, I think that person probably dropped the class. Isabel?
Yes, I'm here.
Isabel, okay, and Isabel, I have you down as Ankundia, so you're gonna, but your screen name pops up differently, right?
Yeah, it's
Just remember that. Yeah.
yeah.
No worries, good. How about Michael Chata? Michael here? Michael, I think, is also dropped because it's a couple of days. Right. I think I saw Katie Ann Howell, is that right? Katie Ann is here?
I'm here.
Okay, very good, very good. How about Safre Hughes? Safre?
Here.
Okay, Safre, and you have yours, you pop up as Safre Andrea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just so I know for the future, so it makes it easier. All right. Who else did I not see? Tolant is Ilazi?
Yeah, I'm here, Professor.
Tolant is here. Good. Okay. Jilong Lee? Jilong?
Yes, I'm here.
Jilong is here. Good. Peter Mangaladze? Peter Mangaladze, no. Okay. Islam Muhammad? Islam, no. Islam has been out for the most of this, so he's probably out. Everybody else is here. Tashi is here, right? Tashi Sherpa. Tashi Sherpa?
Tashi Paulden.
Tashi Paulden, I got. The Tashi Sherpa is not here.
Okay.
Right? Gotcha. Okay. All right. Rachel Twachi. Rachel Twachi's not here. She also.
You're muted, Professor. I think.
We cannot hear you, Professor.
Kevin Young, no? Okay. Very good. All right. So we get down to business. We will probably finish the Iliad today. And
Professor, you were muted for the last like 3 minutes.
I was
So,
muted?
No, yeah, for the last 45 seconds of names. We're trying to tell you that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Gee, it didn't seem that I was muted on the
The last one we heard was Kevin, so like the 4 names before that, I think you were muted for.
Huh.
Professor? Hello?
Yes, Wenfeng. Yes. Oh, 2 people are in the waiting room. Let me get them in. All right. All right. Waiting room. Okay, gotta let these people in. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. So Elise is in there and Mizbah is in there, so okay. Yeah, all right. All right. Are we good now? I think we're good, right? All right. So, finishing the Iliad. Many of you, so you gotta mute.
Boiling? Like putting oils in your hair like at night?
Please mute. Thank you. Many of you have already done the essay on Sarpedon, and as beautiful a story as that is, it really is kind of a prelude. It's kind of a foreshadowing, right, for the death of Patroclus. The death of Sarpedon does remind the reader that in the system of Greek mythology, fate is something that even the gods can't overcome. So Zeus says to the other gods, he says to Hera, Sarpedon is my son. I love Sarpedon so much. He's such a beautiful young man. Can we somehow save him? And Hera says, well, you can't do that, because if you were to do that, all of the other gods and goddesses who have children in the war would do the same thing, and it would throw fate out of whack. So the end of the war has already been essentially written in the book of fate, whatever the Greeks imagine that to be. Everyone's lifespan in the Iliad has already been determined. So it's not proper for Zeus to mess with the functionings of fate. So there are limitations, right, on Zeus's power. And so instead of changing the course of the battle, what he does is he sends down tears of blood. He sort of cries, and it rains, and then the rainfall turns into red sort of blood. And that's supposed to be sort of an omen that, Zeus is sad, that, Zeus's heart is broken, if you will. So that whole story, which is portrayed so beautifully on the vase that used to be in the Metropolitan Museum called the Euphroneus crater, is kind of a foreshadowing for the death of Patroclus. So at the line 777 of book 16, we begin with all these other minor characters dying in the battlefield. So long as the sun was high in the sky, says Homer, the volleys of missiles found their mark, and men fell. But when it sank low at that hour, when plowmen unyoked their oxen, sort of like at the end of the workday, the Greeks proved masters of their fate. They dragged Cebriones' corpse away from the Trojans, and beyond the clash of arms, stripped it of its armor. The traditional behavior of the warrior. You take the dead soldier and you steal what the soldier's wearing. Then Patroclus was minded to destroy the Trojans. And Patroclus, at this point, changed his mind. The instructions that Achilles gave him, that is to say, push the battle if you can, encourage the Greeks, but don't go further because you will take away from my glory. Well, that is a sort of a reversal. So Homer says, on the one hand, the Greeks proved masters of their fate. It almost sounds like they are in control of things. Maybe they can rearrange their fate. But in fact, when you get to the line that Patroclus was minded to destroy the Trojans, it seems more like the turning point, which was said in the Book of Fate, was that Patroclus was not going to follow. He was not going to follow the limitations imposed upon him by Achilles. 3 times that peer of swift Ares attacked them, shouting his dread war cry, each time killing 9 men. But when, like a god, you charged at them again, Patroclus, then your fate loomed in sight. For Apollo met you terrible in combat. So when Homer talks about Patroclus, he does this more with Patroclus really than any other character in the Iliad. He uses this rhetorical device called apostrophe. The apostrophe is when the narrator turns away from the person that they're talking to or singing to, and the narrator talks directly to someone in the story, right? Talks to a character in the story. So instead of saying Patroclus did something, he said, Patroclus, you did something. And it makes for a more sort of emotional connection. So Patroclus, then your fate loomed in sight. Whatever fate was written out for Patroclus may have been obscure to Patroclus, but then even Patroclus himself knew that things had taken a direction that couldn't be changed. For Apollo, the god Apollo met you, Apollo who is terrible in combat. Apollo advanced almost like an omen, and it goes back to sort of book 1, because Apollo, of course, is the god who comes down to punish the Greeks at the request of Chryses, the priest whose daughter has been taken from him. And now Apollo once again is punishing the Greeks, punishing specifically Patroclus. Apollo advanced, veiled in a dense mist, invisible to Patroclus in the tumult, and he stood behind him and struck him in the back with the flat of his hand. He basically caused a concussion. This is a low blow. This was a rabbit punch. This is Apollo, right? Apollo, who can kill armies with his bow and his poisons and his diseases, comes down and actually hits Patroclus in the back of the head, so that the warrior's vision spun. It's like he became disoriented. The helmet came off his head, and it went under. Patroclus's helmet came off and went under his horse's feet with a clang, and the plumes on its crest were streaked with blood and dust. The gods had never allowed it to be foul, to be soiled, until then, right? This is the helmet that is actually the helmet of Achilles, that horsehair plumed helmet that protected the godlike brow and head of Achilles. But now Zeus let Hector wear it for a while, since death was nearing him too. So fate may be written, but the way it's revealed to characters is not necessarily immediately clear. Patroclus is going to die, but in battle with Hector. But Patroclus doesn't know that the gods are going to use this helmet as a sort of a symbol. First, this helmet that belongs to Achilles, right? It was worn by Achilles. First, Patroclus wears it, and he's going to die, and then Hector wears it afterwards, and Hector's going to die. So these are little ways that Homer reminds us of how fate is kind of written, and there's no changing it. So, unfortunately for Patroclus, it's not really an even fight, because he's been sort of stunned. He's been hit in the back of the head. The long shadowed spear, thick, heavy, and strong, tipped with bronze in Patroclus's hands, was wholly shattered. The tasseled shield on its strap fell to the ground, and that blow that hit on the head from Lord Apollo, son of Zeus, had loosened the breastplate. So basically, he almost has become stripped of his armor and his defenses, right? Then Patroclus's mind was dimmed. His noble limbs were slack beneath him, right? He starting to lose consciousness, and dazed, he stood there. A Dardanian, Panthous' son Euphorbus, the best spearman, horseman, and runner of his generation, who had brought down 20 charioteers in this, his apprenticeship in the war, now cast his sharp spear and struck Patroclus in the back, between the shoulders. So Patroclus, defenseless, dazed by the gods, what a terrible way to die, right? This is, he's been done wrong. He's been done dirty. This other character has the first blow, and it takes the first shot at him and spears him in the back, and that's probably already a mortal wound, right? Between the shoulders. He was the first to hurl his spear, not killing you, horse tamer Patroclus, again, addressing Patroclus directly, but pulling the ash spear from your flesh and running back into the throng, fearing to stand and fight you, unarmed now though you were. So Patroclus has certainly gained in stature and glory and strength, in ability. I mean, he's severely wounded, pretty much has lost his armor, and people are still afraid to fight him. Right? Patroclus, yes.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, because I think Anna raises a really good point, and I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I know this is a lecture. Maybe I need to ask less questions, but she mentions in the chat, I don't know if you're reading the chat.
I can't see it right now because of, yeah.
That's no problem. Zeus got advised not to intervene, as it would probably encourage other gods, and that's exactly what happens. So Apollo, Zeus being the strongest, is advised not to intervene, and yet Apollo does. So
yes. Yeah, so that's a good point. There's no very willful. The gods are very willful, and there's no way that Zeus can control them beforehand. And it seems that they all have their own agendas, right? Apollo's agenda seems pretty clear, that he wants to avenge his priest, Chryses, and so he's basically set on destroying the Greeks. So yeah, I mean, it's just amazing that, you know, when we think about how these early, these ancient Greeks thought about their religious um, the gods in their religious system. These are extremely flawed beings, right? They're very willful. They know a lot, but they're certainly not omniscient. So yeah, it's good that you point that out.
Was Apollo also fooled by the disguise?
No, I would think that Apollo knows exactly what's going on. I think Apollo knows exactly what's going on. So, and this is good stuff. We will have an opportunity to do some breakout work. So yeah, as we go on, I'm trying to keep track of the time so that after I go on and on, I'll definitely pause and let you guys talk about some of these issues. I just wanted to sort of paint the picture of this particular scene, which is the death of Patroclus. When a warrior gets this powerful, the way Patroclus has become, it almost takes kind of a low blow to sort of divert him from success in battle. Now Patroclus, going back to the thought of narcissism, Patroclus has never had this kind of reputation as a warrior, but now he is the image of Achilles, right? He's wearing Achilles' armor, or he had been until it started to come off of him because Apollo and others are attacking him. And he's kind of lost his identity. He's kind of, he kind of put himself in the role of Achilles. He's become like the MVP, fighting at the head of the ranks and being, the greatest warrior of the whole of the army. So you wonder, he has kind of lost his grip on where his position is in the pecking order, where he stands in terms of Achilles and the rest of the army. I mean, he's Achilles' friend, but he ain't no Achilles, and he's not an Ajax either. But here he is, kind of believing that he's the greatest warrior, and in fact, acting and succeeding in that way. But fate is fate, and so Hector is now sort of appointed by fate to destroy him. So Hector, seeing brave Patroclus withdraw, stepping back from the fight, because he was struck by the blade in the back, made his way through the ranks and drove at him with his spear, piercing the lower belly and ramming the point home. Patroclus fell with a thud, to the grievous sorrow of the Achaean army. He dies very much like anyone else. He dies like a sort of a common soldier. But of course, he's been wounded. And, this is a foreshadowing also of the way Hector is going to die. As a lion, here comes a simile, sort of a comparison. As a lion in the high mountains may fight with a tireless wild boar over a trickling stream from which both seek to drink, and conquers his panting enemy by strength alone, so Hector, Priam's son, overcame the valiant son of Menoetius, that is Patroclus, who himself had killed so many men, and striking him close at hand, with his spear, robbed him of his life. Then, straddling him, Hector, shouted in victory, "I think you boasted you'd sack our city, Patroclus, take our women captive, sail with them to your native land. How foolish! Hector and his swift horses are here to fight for them. Hector, the finest spearman among the warlike Trojans, I, who shield them from the day of doom. While as for you, Patroclus, the vultures shall have you. Even Achilles, with all his valor, his might, his strength, could not save you, wretched man, though I don't doubt he told you as you left, for he chose to stay." Patroclus, Hector is now talking to the dead Patroclus, right? But this happens a lot, or the nearly dead Patroclus, I should say. There's a Greek word for it, actually. It's kompos, this sort of boasting. You boast over your slain enemy. You give a sort of a speech of you kind of trash talk the person, even if he's sort of almost dead. So Hector is talking to the dying Patroclus, and he says, "Achilles must have said this to you," something along these lines. Patroclus, master horseman, don't return to the hollow ships till you've pierced the tunic at man-killing Hector's chest and drenched it in his blood. No doubt that's what he said, and you, in your madness, thought it would be so. Hector is always, the one character in the Iliad who seems always to be thinking about the situation that might have been, that could have been, that will be, even as he's sort of in the middle of the action, he's imagining, the backstory, or he's imagining what might happen, at the end of the war, and the likelihood that Troy will fall. Hector is really very reflective. That's why I sort of tend to think of him as the anti-narcissist. Because he's able to see himself in the story as well as outside of the story. So he talks all this to, you might even consider it sort of like trash talking, Patroclus. And then Patroclus has his last say. But though your strength was ebbing fast, horse taming Patroclus, yet still you answered. Boast while you can, Hector, for Zeus and Apollo it was who gave you the victory. They conquered me. They stripped the armor from my shoulders. If 20 men like you had faced me alone, all would have died at the point of my spear. But fate, the destroyer, and Apollo, Leto's son, have conquered. Only then came Euphorbus the mortal, the guy who stuck him in the back with the spear. While you are but the third to claim my life. You're number 3, right? You're the sort of like a bullfight. You may be the matador. You put in the final blow. But the gods got me first by knocking me, senseless. And then this guy Euphorbus, put a spear in my back. And so Hector, you're only the third, And then he gives Hector a little prophecy. This I tell you, and go and brood upon it. Go think about it. You indeed have only a little while to live. Even now death approaches, and your fixed destiny to fall at the hands of Achilles, peerless scion of Aeacus. So Patroclus, as often in the epic, he has sort of like the power of prophecy just the moment that he's going to die. This is going to be repeated in the death of Hector, and Hector, of course, is the kind of character who already has this sense of foreboding that he himself is going to die. But instead of saying to Patroclus, oh yeah, I kind of know I'm going to die, I told my wife as much in book 6, he doesn't say that. He says, with these words, death took Patroclus, and his spirit, loosened from his limbs, fled down to Hades, the underworld, where the spirits go, bemoaning its fate and leaving youth and manhood behind. There's another way that Greek warriors die, and also it carries on into Roman literature, as when they're dying, they actually sort of complain about the fact that they're dead. It's like, I can't believe this happened to me. He's bemoaning his fate, right? The soul as it goes away. But dead though he was, noble Hector still replied. Now, dead though Patroclus was, noble Hector still talked to him. Hector's still addressing the corpse of Patroclus. And he says, Patroclus, what makes you so sure of my swift destruction? Who knows? But perhaps Achilles, fair-haired Thetis, may be struck by my spear first and lose his life. Right? Who knows? It might go the other way. And of course, Hector doesn't really believe this. With this, he planted his heel on the warrior's body, drew the spear from the wound, and thrust the corpse away to fall on its back. Then he launched himself with the spear at Automedon, who was accompanying, was a servant of Achilles, who was accompanying Patroclus. He was keen to strike him down, but the swift team swept Automedon away, those immortal steeds, the glorious gifts that the gods gave Peleus. So Hector immediately returns back to the fight, but he will take the armor and in the next book, 17, Hector actually puts the armor on. Let's read this part and then we'll do a little breakout. Meanwhile, Glaucus, Hippolochus' son, remember Glaucus from book 6 who fought with Diomedes, and then they figured out that they had a family connection, so they stopped fighting. Glaucus, leader of the Lycians, of whom Sarpedon was also one, anger in his face, was berating Hector. Right? He was berating Hector, he was complaining to Hector. You look the part, but in battle you fail to act it, Hector. Your fame is hollow since you play the woman. See if you can save your city and your homeland by yourselves, you Trojans. We Lycians will not fight the Greeks for Troy, where no one thanks an ally for his endless efforts in the war. Since you left Sarpedon, the other Lycian, right, your friend and guest, as an Argive prey and spoil, you left Sarpedon out on the battlefield, right? He's dead, and the Greeks are taking his corpse. Why indeed should you try to save one of lower rank? Sarpedon, alive, was often an asset to your army and yourself, but you lacked the courage even to drive the dogs from his corpse once he was dead. So now, if these Lycians are mine, he's the commander now because Sarpedon is gone, home we go. And that spells ruin for Troy. Think, if the Trojans were only filled with the courage without limit that men possess who toil and sweat in battle for their country, we might drag Patroclus' corpse back to Ilium. Were we to snatch his body from the field and take it to Priam's great city, the Greeks would exchange it for Sarpedon's body, clad in its precious armor. So Glaucon is saying, Hector has failed in completing the killing of Patroclus because he did not think about taking the body and taking the armor right away, and he wasn't really respecting Sarpedon's death. He wasn't overly respecting Sarpedon's death. So Glaucus says we could have exchanged the fallen warrior and his armor. For Achilles, continues Glaucus, is the best of the Greeks besides the ships. He and his men who fight in close combat, and this squire, this attendant, Patroclus, who has fallen, was his. Yet you even lack the courage to stand against mighty Ajax, his battle cry ringing in your ears. You daren't look him in the eye since he's the better man. So you have kind of a recap here of what happened in book 2 with Thersites, who was giving Agamemnon a hard time. This is the only time in the Iliad where we see Hector's authority challenged, and it's not because he's failing in his military leadership. He's failing to do an act of sort of bravado. He didn't take his prize. The corpse of Patroclus and the armor that it was wearing was his prize. Should have taken it. And so he looks weak. So Hector then gleamed at him and answered angrily, "Is that you, Glaucus? Why so arrogant? I thought your wisdom was the greatest of all in dark-soiled Lycia. Well, I reject your claim that I won't face mighty Ajax. I have no fear of a fight or of the sound of chariots, but the will of Aegis-bearing Zeus is all-powerful. He sends even a brave man reeling and robs him of victory as easily as it sets him." Of course, we know that Hector and Ajax actually did fight, right? So he's certainly not afraid of Ajax. "Come, my friend, and stand by me. Stand by my side and watch me in action, and then tell me whether this day I play the coward, or, as you say, whether I put an end to many a Greek eager for fame who tries to defend the corpse of Patroclus." So Hector, instead of turning on his ally the way, say, Agamemnon turned on Achilles, he said, let's go shoulder to shoulder, and I will prove to you. You might have doubted me, but I'm going to prove this to you, right? It just increases our respect for Hector. With this, Hector shouted aloud to the warriors, "Trojans, Lycians, and you Dardanians who like close combat, be men, my friends, and think of glorious war while I don peerless Achilles' armor, that fine battle gear that I stripped from mighty Patroclus, whom I slew." So he actually did at least secure somehow. He secured the armor, even if he hasn't secured the body of Patroclus, and he's able to run out and get it. Hector of the gleaming helmet ran over to the field in the near distance to reach his men who were bearing Achilles' bright armor to the city. There he halted out of the bitter fight and he changed his armor. So he's almost like he doubts himself, right? It's like he would have continued fighting as Hector, but the and the armor would have been a prize of the war. But he says, no, wait a minute, I have to become Achilles now. I have to sort of, I need more juice. I need more authority as a warrior, and my guys are starting to doubt me, and Glaucus is giving me a hard time. So I'd actually better rise to the occasion. And so he puts on the armor of Achilles. His own armor he handed to the warlike Trojans for them to take to sacred Ilium. And he donned the imperishable armor of Achilles that the gods of Olympus had given Achilles' father Peleus, and he in turn, Achilles gave in turn to his son Achilles. Now that he was old, right, the son would never wear it in old age. Achilles would not get to wear this armor, which was his father's armor, even though Peleus had worn it all through his life until he kind of retired from fighting. But we know that Achilles is not going to have the opportunity to wear this armor again, and certainly not going to, into his old age. So now we have the situation where Hector has sort of co-opted or absorbed the persona of Achilles. And this is not narcissism at all, right? If anything, this is sort of like self-doubt. For Hector, it's not enough to shine forth as Hector. You have to be not only Hector, but Achilles also, right? So he has a lot of self-doubt. He is not self-absorbed. He's the anti-narcissist, I think. Let me see. Let me just check that. It's 8:40. We should do a little breakout room. And I will ask you to consider this scene at the end of book 17. I'll read it to you and then we'll take a breakout room. Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother, and Meriones lifted Patroclus' body in their arms and with a powerful effort raised him high in the air, while the Trojans, seeing the Achaeans' action, gave a great cry and charged towards them as hounds in the hunt running before a pack of youths rush at a wild boar, eager to drag him down to destruction. But giving ground and scattering widely in flight when he wheels among them, trusting in his strength. So the Trojans came on at first, groups of them thrusting with swords and double-edged spears, but drained of color when the two Ajaxes, the Iantes, Ajax the Greater, who fought with Hector, and Ajax the Lesser, when the two Ajaxes turned on them, and they were scared to attack and fight for the body of Patroclus. Meanwhile, the two warriors, Menelaus and Meriones, hurried the corpse from the field and back to the hollow ships, as the fierce conflict raged like a fire that sweeps suddenly through a city, setting the houses on fire so they crumble in the intense glow, while a strong wind drives it onward, roaring. After them, as they went, rose the endless din, the noise of chariots and spearmen. But they struggled forward with the corpse, like mules on a rough mountain track that exert all their strength to drag a log to be used for a beam, perhaps, or a ship's timber, hearts pounding as they heave wearily as they pull, they're sweating and their hearts are pounding, soaked in sweat. And behind them, the Iantes, the Ajax Greater and Lesser, held their ground as a wooded ridge holds back the overflow of rivers, turning the powerful streams back over the plain, preventing the fierce flood breaking through. Yet, though the Iantes, Ajaxes, stalled them, the Trojans were relentless, led by Aeneas and glorious Hector. And as the flock of jackdaws or starlings fly, shrieking in alarm when they see a death-dealing falcon swoop towards them, So the Achaean, the Greek youth, gave up the fight and fled before the pair with frantic cries. Many a fine piece of weaponry was lost at the trench, and on either side, the Danaans, the Greeks, fled, though the war continued unabated. So my question as we go to breakout room is, what in terms of style of speaking and style of writing, what do you detect in this particular passage that might be a little different from other passages that we have read? So that's question one. I'll write in the chat. And question two is, why do you think there's so much anxiety about the body of Patroclus? Okay, so I'm gonna write those questions in the chat and we'll do some breakout rooms. So let's go there. First, let me put these questions in the chat. One, what in terms of style distinguishes this passage? And two, why the intense effort to preserve, rescue the body of Patroclus? Okay.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you explain question one again? And also, these questions are just for discussion, right? We don't have to email you the
Just
answers.
discussion, no email, no, just to discuss in your groups, whatever random groups you. So in terms of like how it's written, the language that's used in this passage, I'm just interested if anything sort of leaps out at you, right? And maybe you can talk about it in your groups, and then put your thoughts in the chat. Okay. All right. Let me set up these rooms, which means I have to go to here. And there are 28 participants, so 6 maybe would be good. 6 times 5 is 30. 5 times 6 is 30. And here we go. All right, we'll do this for, let's say, 5 minutes. Here we go.
progress.
Okay, hopefully we're all back now. And if you want to put some ideas in the chat, question 1, which is more mechanical, what do you think in terms of style or the style of writing? What distinguishes this passage? What makes it seem strange or unusual? It's rich in a way. Anyone have any ideas? Or you can unmute. It's just so hard to unmute in a sort of an organized way. It's easier to, you could, I guess, if you raise your hand, that's another way of doing, right? If you could use the hand raise function. It's just, I have to stop the screen share to do that. So I'm looking at the chat now. Does anyone have any ideas?
Hi, I have my hand raised, but
Oh, how
so,
come I can a second? This is Elise.
yes.
I'm looking at my Zoom thing. Where does I don't see the little hand function here. It's maybe
it's
I
under
have
the more, the ellipses to the right side.
under
No.
more. I don't have a
Mhm.
more on this function screen. Anyway, anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we had said that it didn't seem like it was much dialogue between characters, but kind of like an omniscient third person kind of overview of what's happening in front. And that's what was striking versus the other passages.
Good. Okay. Yeah. What else? Anybody else want to chime in? Good ideas. Katie Ann says, I think the pace of this, the pace of this part changes the way we read it. We're moving on from a lot of the character introductions and a filler of the rising action. Okay, definitely a change of pace. Who else had something? Marissa says, it seems very poetic. Most passages are descriptive. This offers a lot of comparisons that help. So that's the one that really struck me. And this is an extremely, it's very dense in its similes, right? There are so many similes. The similes of hunting, similes of, let me just go back for a second and pop the screen back up. Right, similes of young men hunting a boar, similes of a fire rushing through a city, right? Similes of a mule dragging a log. They just keep going and going and going. Then at the end, it's like a flock of birds. A flock of birds or starlings shrieking. It's almost like the scene has to be painted in bright colors. And what is the scene that we're looking at? The scene is two men carrying the dead corpse of Patroclus away, back to safety, back behind the Greek defenses, while the Trojans are attacking, right? And so that leads then into the second question: why this intense, why this feverish fight over the body? Right? You want to put some ideas in the chat? Go ahead. Why this feverish fight over the body? Or does it strike you as perhaps this is the way it has to be? I mean, in terms of proper burial, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in all military traditions that I'm aware of, there's the sense of you don't leave a fallen comrade behind, right? because you want to offer proper burial, and if at all possible, you want to have the body returned to the family, right?
Professor,
Yes.
in Greek mythology, if the body doesn't get like proper burial, doesn't he
Yeah.
go to like hell?
Well,
soul?
it's interesting, right? So we have this in the Odyssey, right? We have the sense that if there's not proper burial, the spirit will be sort of it won't be at ease, and it might sort of wander the earth until someone actually gives it a proper burial. So this happens with a character called Elpenor in the Odyssey, right? So yes, burial rites are very important, and and that's why Hector gets a hard time from Glaucus. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yes.
Just to add in, I think like one of the reasons perhaps could be knowing that he was like a very close companion of Achilles.
Yep.
So maybe that could be like to preserve his body and like send it off to him would probably enrage him. So
Yeah.
maybe like a way to get Achilles all riled up.
So the actually for Achilles to actually see the body would be like to motivate him to get back into the fight. So using the body kind of as sort of an argument to get Achilles back into the fight. That I think that's interesting. I think it's also interesting to reflect on if they didn't do this, Achilles would have probably been even more enraged at all of the Greek soldiers. He might have gone and killed everyone. Because the idea of leaving Patroclus behind, Achilles would not have been able to handle that. So it's not an unusual thing to think about the importance of retrieving the body of a fallen soldier, but the reason that I bring it up is because a lot of people have looked at the Iliad, even though it's really a poem of war, right? It's as a poem about the possession of bodies, enslaved bodies and dead bodies, right? The idea that the initial conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles is the possession of these enslaved women, right? And Chryseis being taken away from her father, and then being the possession of Agamemnon. But then when Agamemnon has to give her back, then the enslaved Briseis, who's Achilles' prize, right, becomes kind of a token of exchange. And so the bodies are like sort of tokens of exchange. And Glaucus says that really most pointedly in the passage that we read just before. It's like you hold on to the body as sort of leverage. You might be able to get back the body of Sarpedon. And it's funny in a way that in the death of Sarpedon, when you read the passage and write the essay about it, we know what happens to his body. The gods really, Zeus loves Sarpedon, and even though Sarpedon has to die, Zeus sends these sort of angels or messengers down, sleep and death, sleep in order to make Sarpedon's death an easy one, and death to sort of close the eyes and make sure that the soul goes off to its appropriate rest. And then the body itself is taken back to Lycia, right? The angels kind of carry the body off the battlefield. It's kind of like in Norse mythology, right, when the bodies are carried to Valhalla. And so Glaucus doesn't know this. I mean, he doesn't see the body of Sarpedon. So he assumes the Greeks must have it. But he's thinking, if we had taken the body of Patroclus, we could have said, hey, let's do an exchange, a prisoner exchange, if you will, even though the two, we're talking about two corpses. So the reason that I'm making a lot of this is to sort of set up book 24, right, where Achilles is in possession of the body of Hector, and he has this very obsessive and possessive interest in the body. It's really hard to even sort of imagine even in Homeric terms, why it is that Achilles has such a fixation on the body of Hector. And we will get to that. It's 9 o'clock, so let's take our break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and we will try to wrap up the Iliad, okay? Sound good? Let's pause the recording, and resume the recording. Okay. Sorry about that. Here we go. So, the description of the armor is what in rhetorical terms is called ekphrasis. It's a long poetic description of a physical piece of work, a physical piece of artwork. And when you read this, you realize that it's impossible to imagine this as a piece of three-dimensional art, because it is it's not only is it too elaborate, but it's in motion, right? So here's the description. So saying, his huge form, the body of Hephaestus, rose from the anvil, and panting heavily, he limped about, though agile enough on his withered legs. He moved the bellows, you pump the fire, pump the air into the fire and make it hotter. He moved the bellows from the fire, and collecting his tools together, placed them in a silver chest. Then he wiped his hands and face, his huge neck, shaggy breast with a sponge, and he donned his tunic. Grasping a thick staff, he limped from the forge, supported by servants made of gold, fashioned like living girls, who attended swiftly on their master. He obviously can build even like robots. He builds these statues that actually move, and they sort of are his servants. As well as the use of their limbs, they had intellect, these robots. They had this like AI. It's like the first mention in literature, as far as I know, of artificial intelligence, right? They've made robots with intellect, right? And the immortals gave them skill in subtle crafts. And these supported Hephaestus, these creations of his, as he limped towards Thetis. And so now he's sort of like, he's very presentable because he was working, and he was very sweaty and, sort of dirty from all of the soot from the ironwork. And now he is much more presentable, and he's very charming, right? So here's, it's also an interesting representation of the less favored classes of society. It reminds me of Thersites in book 2. Not the beautiful, noble, athletic warrior class, but the working man, the one who works so hard that his body is actually sort of crippled. Yet he is enormously skillful. He's an inevitable part of the whole working of fate. He's got to play his part. Nobody else can play his part. He's got to create this armor, and he's indispensable. Is the word I'm looking for. He's indispensable. And when and in his mannerisms, he's very charming. So he's kind of like almost like the rehabilitation of the Thersites figure in book 1. It's like, yeah, you can be someone who is who works hard with their hands, and and still deserves a place at the table with the Olympians, right? So now they talk, and Thetis is very sort of self-pitying. She says, "Is there a goddess who has suffered more heartfelt sorrows at the hands of Zeus than I?" You remember back in book 1, she's trying to get Zeus to promise to help her son Achilles by punishing Agamemnon in some way, right? And she's always, the Latin phrase "mater dolorosa," the grieving mother, right? Comes to mind. She says, "I alone," Thetis says, "I alone, of all the daughters of the sea, Zeus wedded to a mere human, Peleus. Zeus gave me as a bride to Peleus, son of Aeacus, and unwillingly it was that I lay with a mortal man." It was kind of a forced wedding. And he, Peleus, keeps to his palace now, weighed down sadly by the years. I mean, he's mortal, right? Peleus, Achilles' father, is just a mortal. He's going to grow old and weak, right? Thetis is going to be young and beautiful forever. So he's there growing old while I suffer further grief. She says, I brought a mighty and peerless son into this world, the greatest of warriors. I nursed him like a shoot in the fertile orchard, and like a sapling, swiftly he grew. I sent him to Troy, to Ilium, with the beaked ships there to fight the Trojans, but I shall never welcome him home once more to the house of Peleus. So it's a futile effort. She knows he's going to die, right? She knows her son's going to die in the battle, yet she needs to have him properly armed. She's not going to send him back in. She's not going to send him back into battle. She knows that he's going back into battle. There's nothing she can do to stop him, because he's going to have this grief over the loss of Patroclus. But she at least can make sure that he has the proper armor, that he makes a good showing, right? So she talks about, what's happened, since the capture of Chryseis. She says, King Agamemnon has taken from Achilles the girl that the Achaeans gave him as a prize. Then, wasting his heart in grief for her, he refused to ward off ruin from the Greeks. He refused to fight, despite the elders offering fine gifts in Book 9, when they offered Achilles gifts to come back, and the Trojans penned them in by their ships' sterns and proved immovable. Then, she tells us, he let Patroclus put on his own armor and join the battle with Achilles' men, the Myrmidons, and all day long they fought by the Scaean gate in front of Troy, and they would have sacked the city if Apollo hadn't caused the death of brave Patroclus at the height of his success, and granted the final act to Hector, because Hector was the third actor to slay Patroclus. So, says Thetis, I have come to clasp your knees. I've come begging you, Hephaestus, and I ask you to give my son, who is doomed to an early death, a shield and a helmet, a breastplate, and bronze greaves, fittings for your legs, a full set of armor, along with the ankle pieces that go with them, to replace the armor lost when the Trojans killed his faithful friend, for whom my son now lies in the dust, struck with grief to his very heart. This is Achilles in mourning, can't be consoled. And Hephaestus says, don't worry, I can do what you wish. Take heart, be easy in your mind. I wish I could save Achilles from his sad death when the fateful time arrives, as easily as I can make the armor for him. Splendid enough to make many a man marvel, who gazes on it some fine day. So there's this sense that, Hephaestus can at least go as far as doing a really wonderful job making armor, but he obviously can't stop the death of Achilles. But the armor itself is going to kind of have a history after Achilles is dead. It's going to go on in history. Right? Everyone who gazes on it is going to be amazed. It's going to be remembered in history. So he creates the armor, and we see the workings of the blast furnace. And first, he made the shield. In fact, the shield is really the thing that's described in greatest detail. Broad, solid, adorning it skillfully everywhere, and he put a triple rim around it, silver, etc., etc. On the shield, he put the earth and the sky and the sea and the sun and the moon and all the constellations that crown the heavens, the Pleiades, the stars that show you when it's raining, and the Hyades and Great Orion, and the Big Dipper, Ursa Major, the bear, etc. So he puts the constellations, and then he puts two fine cities of mortal men, right? In one city, there were marriage feasts with torches, and the brides were led from their rooms throughout the city, and the sounds of wedding songs were everywhere. And young men were dancing, whirling around to flutes and lyres, while the women stood in their doorways gazing. So it's this wedding scene, multiple weddings happening. But the men, in a separate part, in a peaceful city, had gathered in an assembly where two of them were arguing a case, contesting the blood price to be paid for another's death. The defendant claimed that he had paid all that was right. In other words, there was a murder, and the murderer tries to buy the peace of the victim's family by saying, well, accept this ransom, right? But the accuser, the victim's family, member, refused his acceptance, and the pair of them sought arbitration. Both were cheered on by their supporters, whom the heralds firmly restrained. They're like court officers, right? Making sure that the argument doesn't get out of hand. And the elders, the judges, sat on a sacred bench, a semicircle of polished stone, and they received the speaker's staff from the heralds. In other words, they speak in turn. It's an orderly process, an orderly judicial process. So you have a wedding, which is an orderly creation of the family and creation of new rights within and between families, and you have an orderly judicial procedure, right? So, and then the other city, which was a city at war, it was besieged by two armies in glittering armor. Their plan was to attempt to sack it or to accept perhaps half of all of its wealth. But the citizens inside the city resisted, and they were arming for an ambush, and their wives and their children and the old were left behind to defend the walls while the soldiers themselves went out in battle, led by Ares and Athena, all of these figures being made of gold. So you get the sense of Hephaestus makes this really elaborate creation, but there's also, they're in motion. It's like, like in Harry Potter, when the pictures are moving and talking to you, you have motion, you have sound coming out of, it's almost as if he's created an iPad and you're watching a movie, right? Because you can't imagine these as static figures. So all of these warriors, and then there's another scene by a river, and there's a watering place there for herds of animals, a likely place for soldiers to mount an ambush, because in war you attack the livestock, the animals of your adversary, because you need to feed your army. So you have an ambush happening or about to happen, right? And the scene is like the ambush is portrayed as if it were like a movie. The herd's arrival, two herdsmen were playing flutes, ignorant of the ambush. They were, just having their happy day, leading their animals to water, not knowing that the attackers were laying in wait and were about to kill them. And then the ambushers came out and attacked them. So it's like a movie. It's not like a static piece of art. Everywhere strife and panic were at work, and ruthless fate, which has determined when people are going to die, and there's no questioning her. Here, laying her hands on one man freshly wounded, there on another still unscathed. I mean, fate can come and claim a life, even if that person is, doesn't expect it and hasn't suffered any injury. Then all of a sudden they're gone. And in the next scene, dragging a corpse through the chaos by its feet. So foreshadowing, right? Like the corpse of Patroclus having to be rescued. Here's a corpse that's being pulled out of the battlefield. Just like living men, they seem to clash and fight and drag away the bodies of those killed. On the shield also, this shield never ends. He depicts, fallow land that has been kept from, has been allowed to rest for a year, and plowed earth. And the plowmen were sowing, they were going back and forth over the fields. And when they got to one end of their plowing, someone had to give them a cup of honeyed wine because they needed to reinforce themselves. It was kind of a prize at the end of the row. And they had to turn around and go back, and so someone else had to give them another cup. And it's farmland being well treated. And then there's also an estate, a royal farm, where laborers were reaping. They were cutting down the corn, the wheat, that they had grown, and someone else behind them, other people behind them, are tying them up with, making bundles of wheat to bring back to be processed, to be threshed. And so there's all of this, farming going on, and also a preparation of a sacrifice. An ox was being prepared for the feast. And there's grapes that are being grown. So the whole world of a city, with all of its produce, right? The grapes for wine, the wheat, and there's a lot of happiness there. There's livestock, there's plenty of animals, what have you, but there's also violence. So there's the violence in the city of the armies attacking the city, and then even in the peaceful scenes of nature, you have predators and their prey. In the next scene, two savage lions amongst the leaders were gripping a bull. The the herdsmen were leading these cattle, and all of a sudden these mountain lions come out and they attack the bull, and young men and dogs try to fend off the mountain lions, but the lions had already torn into the bull and they started to eat it. And the herdsmen tried to get the dogs to drive the lions away, but the dogs were too afraid. So there's this kind of warfare that's built in nature, because nature, of course, is full of conflict and predation and predators with prey. So it's not like nature is a completely peaceful scene. But there's definitely this theme that there are two cities on the shield, right? The city of peace and the city of war. So now this is the shield that Achilles is going to wear when he fights Hector. So the question is, why might this be so compelling that that when Hector meets Achilles, Hector will see this scene. When the two of them meet in battle, and I guess we'll read this next time because it's getting a little late, so we're probably not going to get to it. But when Achilles and Hector meet in battle, Achilles is looking at himself in a way, because when he looks at Hector, he sees his own armor, the armor that has been stripped from the body of Patroclus. And so he is reflecting on the fact that when he kills Hector, he's sort of killing himself. He's pushed fate further along in the direction that's going to end up meaning his own death, right? So there's a kind of a narcissism in that. He sees himself, but he's not engrossed so much in himself. He's kind of given it to fate. So Achilles sees himself reflected in Hector. Then Hector looks at Achilles, and what does Hector see? Well, Hector sees a city, a wealthy city, and a well-ordered city, or at least in part, right? He basically sees Troy. He sees what Troy was before the Greeks came, right? A happy place ruled by a wise king with lots of food, grain, grapes, lots of happiness. And then suddenly there's this war and it ruins everything. So when I see this scene, I think, okay, so Hector is looking at this depiction of two possible cities, the city of war and the city of peace. And I don't think that we're meant to read it so that, Hector has to find some responsibility in what happened to his city. He is just being forced to reflect upon the fact that this is fate. A city can be prosperous, and then a city can be attacked and can be destroyed. And it's almost as if, Homer is having us think about Hector as looking at the city and saying to himself, Hector, you lived your best life. You did what you had to do. You were the defender of this place. You did everything you could. There's nothing to be ashamed of in your behavior. So when Achilles sees himself, it's pretty much Achilles is very, very, very much sort of an egotist, right? When Hector sees his own life flashing before his eyes in the vision of the shield, he kind of sees himself as playing a role in a much larger organism, the life of the city. And he perhaps this is Homer's way of saying, well, Hector, it's your time, your time has come. It's your day. This is your last day, but before you go, before Achilles kills you, you look upon the scene and you say, you lived your best life. You did what you could. So, and I think that's why Homer describes this scene so elaborately, and I think the book divisions are ancient. I think the books always end in this very nice closure, and just like the rescue of the body of Patroclus ended the previous book, in this book, what happens is the armor is made and it's given to Thetis to bring back, and she kind of just sort of swoops it away. She's sort of like it's armor that sort of comes down from heaven, and she doesn't even really contemplate what it is that she's carrying. She just carries it away. It's almost like what Hephaestus could not alter fate. He couldn't alter the fate of Achilles. He couldn't say, "Oh, I can make it so Achilles won't die," but he could inscribe fate. He could craft fate as an artistic representation, and for Hector's sake. Okay, we are at 9:37. That's pretty much a full day. So I'm going to open it for some questions and thoughts, and then we will wrap up. If you have some things to say and you want to pop them in the chat. I had missed one of the things in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, Miss Rock is asking, can someone add me on the class group chat? I don't know if you've kind of put something together and you have a coordinator. Katie Ann Howell is asking that too. Tashi Palden. I like that. I really like that idea that people help each other. Just in closing, I've done this course many times and often, read these same texts, but it's always sort of face to face. And until before COVID, I've never done it. Never did it virtually before COVID. What I would do is I would have people write the essays in class. At the end of the hour, sort of set aside the last half hour of class, and they would write, and then I would read them that night and give them back the next day. And I got to know people that way, and it was really nice. I got to know not only the people and their names, but I got to know sort of a little bit about their writing style and their approach to the text. This Zoom is it's a distant second. We're kind of stuck with what we have here, but it just it's not as good as being in person. Talon says your email. I did see that, and I think I probably also answered it. So okay, are we good to wrap up tonight? Going once, going twice?
Yep.
Okay, I will see everybody tomorrow at 8. We will definitely finish the Iliad, and we'll probably definitely get into book 1 of the Odyssey as well. All right. Good night.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Good night. Thank you.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a question. This was the first class I attended.
Yes.
So about catching up or making up assignments.
Yes.
Is everything like on the thing is I'm not on Blackboard. It doesn't show me register for the course, so all the course materials on the blog. You're muted, Professor. I still can't hear you.
Oh,
there we go.
okay, good. All right, I think it might be on my end. Yeah, Nicholas, I don't use Blackboard. I only do this course in the summer, and so they never turn it on. And you know what? It doesn't really matter because I work off of the blog. You have the blog, right?
Yes, I've got the blog.
So the only thing then that I need to send you outside of the blog is that packet of essay prompts and essay readings. I think you're on you're on the official roster, I believe, right?
Yeah.
You're officially okay. If you just did you get that? Did you get the package of?
I don't
Okay.
think I did.
Okay, it's like it's 12 passages with the essay prompts, and you write about 300 words per each prompt, and it's the readings sequentially as we go through the course, and that's basically your whole grade is based on that. The 12 essays are worth 7 points each, maximum 7 points each.
Okay.
And I grade them very generously, but I grade them kind of like 6.7, 6.8, 6.9, something like that. And then there's 4 leftover points, which I'll do a very quick Google questionnaire, and you can get 4 points at the end. So I have to send that to you. So if you send me a separate email, I will attach that document. So all you have to do is do those 12 essays. And the other thing I ask is that you, as often as you can, every class would be great, but I know obviously it's people are going to be absent, etc. But as often as you can, if you could just sort of shoot out an email with a line or two of a reaction to something that we read that night that interested you, something you found interesting,
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So to be clear, there wasn't any like essay prompts due yet.
No, I mean, in a sense, you can kind of hold them all to the end, but it would be
Gotcha.
awful for me if I had to read 35 times 12 essays and have one day to put in grades. That would be really.
Okay. I guess my final question is:
Yeah.
Is there a deadline to drop? Is that already passed? When?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to look in the manual.
All right, I'll.
Yeah.
That's it then. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I have one quick question.
Sure.
So, I know you mentioned 12 writings. They're 8 points each, correct? And then
8
the
points,
last.
not 7, 8 points each, right?
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. So the
12.
grade consists of just those 12, and then I remember the first day of class you said the notes were optional but highly recommended, correct?
The notes, yeah, just as often as you possibly can, even if it's not every night. Just shoot me an email with not all the notes you took in a given lecture, but just 1 or 2 sentences about things that you found interesting, intriguing from that day's lecture.
Okay.
From that day's.
But they're not graded, right?
No.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Very good. All right. Thank you all. Bye.